70 miles off the coast of Massachusetts, a single snag in a fishing net changed history. It wasn't a record-breaking catch that brought the FBI swarming the docks at midnight. It was a rusted, barnacle-covered chest. What lay inside didn't just hold millions. It unraveled a 40-year-old unsolved murder. The Atlantic Ocean is a graveyard of secrets, and Arthur Pendleton knew exactly how unforgiving it could be. At 62, Arthur was a man carved by salt and wind. His trawler, the Iron Wake, was drowning in debt. The bank in Gloucester had already sent their final notice. By the end of the month, the boat would be seized, ending a family legacy that stretched back 3 generations. It was a bleak Tuesday afternoon in late November. The sky was the color of bruised iron, and the swells were cresting at 12 feet. Arthur stood in the wheelhouse, his calloused hands gripping the helm, while his only deckhand, a 24-year-old kid named Tommy Russo, worked the aft deck. Tommy was green, desperate for cash to pay off a gambling debt to some unsavory men in South Boston, and entirely unprepared for what the ocean was about to surrender. "Haul it up!" Arthur barked over the roaring diesel engine and crashing waves. "The radar shows a front moving in. We're done for the day." Tommy engaged the hydraulic winch. The thick steel cables began to groan, wrapping around the drum. But instead of the usual steady hum of a heavy catch, the winch suddenly shrieked. The boat tilted violently to the starboard side, throwing Arthur against the navigation console. "Cut the power!" Arthur yelled, rushing out onto the freezing deck. "We caught a reef." "It's not a reef, boss," Tommy shouted back, his face pale beneath his yellow rain slicker. "The cables are pulling straight up. We're hooked on something heavy, but it's moving." Arthur grabbed the backup lever, his heart hammering in his chest. If the cables snapped, they would whip across the deck and cut a man in half. He eased the tension, feathering the hydraulics. Inch by painful inch, the winch screamed in protest. The diesel engine choked, blowing thick black smoke into the frigid air. But slowly, the payload broke the surface. It wasn't a tangled mass of fishing gear. It wasn't a piece of a sunken shipping container. Hanging suspended over the turbulent grey water was a massive rectangular object wrapped in a thick cocoon of kelp, fishing line, and calcified barnacles. It was bound in heavy, rusted iron chains. "Swing it over the deck," Arthur ordered, his voice barely audible over the wind. With a deafening crash, the object slammed onto the wooden planks of the Iron Wake, splintering the deck boards. As the water drained away, Arthur and Tommy approached it cautiously. Using a crowbar, Arthur scraped away a thick layer of green slime and crustaceans. Beneath the marine growth was dark, heavy metal, possibly bronze or reinforced steel. It was a maritime chest, the kind used in the mid-20th century for secure naval transport, measuring about 4 feet long and 2 feet high. "Arthur," Tommy whispered, his eyes wide with a sudden, feverish greed. "Do you know what this is? This is a wreck haul. This could be pirate gold, Spanish silver." "Don't be stupid, kid," Arthur muttered, though his own hands were shaking. "Pirates didn't use reinforced combination dials." Arthur pointed to the center of the chest. Encased in a protective metal housing was a heavy rotary dial, completely fused by rust and salt. Above the dial, faintly stamped into the corroded metal, was an eagle insignia and the letters DOD, Department of Defense. "Get the angle grinder," Arthur said, his voice dropping to a low, dangerous register. For 45 minutes, sparks rained down on the wet deck as Tommy relentlessly worked the grinder against the heavy steel hinges. The storm was closing in, rain beginning to lash against their faces like shards of glass. But neither man noticed. The fever of discovery had taken hold. With a final echoing crack, the locking mechanism gave way. Arthur jammed the crowbar under the lid and leaned his entire body weight onto it. The vacuum seal hissed, releasing a smell of stagnant air, oil, and ancient paper. The heavy lid groaned open. Inside, resting on a bed of decaying, waterlogged velvet, were rows of heavy rectangular bricks. They were dulled by time and moisture, but as Tommy frantically wiped one on his sleeve, the unmistakable, brilliant luster of solid gold gleamed in the dim light. "Holy Mother of God!" Tommy gasped, falling backward onto the wet deck. "Arthur, we're rich. We're actually rich." There were 40 ingots in total. At current market value, Arthur knew instantly they were looking at over $30 million. But Arthur wasn't looking at the gold. His eyes were drawn to a thick, waterproof, rubberized military satchel resting in the corner of the chest. With trembling hands, Arthur unclasped the satchel. Inside was a leather-bound ledger, perfectly preserved, and a velvet box. He popped the box open to reveal a custom-made platinum pocket watch. Engraved on the inside of the casing was a name that made the blood drain from Arthur's face. To Richard Covington, for services rendered to the Republic. Richard Covington was a legendary Massachusetts maritime shipping magnate who had vanished without a trace in 1987. The official story was that his private Cessna had crashed over the dense forests of the Appalachian Mountains. His body was never found. But if his personal effects and a fortune in untraceable gold were sitting in a Department of Defense lockbox at the bottom of the Atlantic. The official story was a lie. Arthur flipped open the ledger. It wasn't a manifest. It was a list of names, dates, and bank account routing numbers. Besides several prominent names, including a sitting U.S. Senator and a former Director of Naval Intelligence, were detailed notes of offshore payoffs, illegal arms shipments, and something cryptically referred to as Project Black Tide. "Tommy," Arthur said, snapping the ledger shut, his voice dead serious. "We didn't find treasure. We found a death warrant." "What are you talking about?" Tommy demanded, clutching a gold bar to his chest. "We take this to port. We melt it down. We disappear. I can pay off the Rossi family. You can save your boat. Look at the serial numbers on the gold, kid," Arthur pointed sharply. "Those are U.S. Treasury stamps. You try to melt this down or fence it, they'll have the feds on us before the furnace gets hot. And this book is why Covington was killed." "So we burn the book," Tommy yelled, the panic and greed warring in his eyes. "No," Arthur said, shoving the ledger into his jacket. "We take it back, but we don't say a word to the Coast Guard. We dock at the old pier on the south side. I need to make a phone call." The return journey to Gloucester Harbour was an agonizing, silent nightmare. The storm had fully unleashed its fury, tossing the iron wake like a child's toy. But the real storm was inside the wheelhouse. Tommy paced relentlessly, his eyes darting to the heavy tarp they had thrown over the chest. Arthur kept his eyes locked on the radar, navigating blindly through the torrential rain, his mind racing. They slipped into Gloucester Harbour at 11:30 p.m., killing the running lights and gliding into a derelict, rotting pier on the industrial side of the port. The docks were deserted. "Help me load 2 of the bars and the satchel into my truck," Arthur ordered. "What about the rest of it?" Tommy asked nervously. "It stays in the bilge hold beneath the ice," Arthur replied. "You stay on the boat, you lock the cabin, and you keep my shotgun in your lap. Do not call anyone. Do you understand me, Tommy? No girlfriends, no bookies. If anyone knows we have this, we're dead." Tommy nodded, though his eyes were wide and terrified. Arthur drove his rusted Ford pickup through the rain-slicked streets of Gloucester, heading inland. He wasn't going to the police. You don't hand over $30 million and a Black Ops blackmail ledger to the local cops. He was going to the only man he trusted with something this dangerous, William Harding. William was a retired antiquities appraiser and a former forensic accountant who now ran a dusty, high-end pawn shop in a quiet suburban strip mall. He was a paranoid, brilliant hermit who owed Arthur his life after Arthur had pulled him from a sinking pleasure craft a decade prior. Arthur banged on the reinforced glass door of the pawn shop until a light flicked on in the back. A moment later, William, wearing a faded bathrobe and clutching a heavy revolver, peered through the blinds. Recognizing Arthur, he unlocked the deadbolts. "Are you out of your mind, Arthur? It's midnight," William grumbled, leading him to the back office. Arthur didn't say a word. He placed his heavy duffel bag on William's cluttered desk and unzipped it. He pulled out one of the gold ingots, slamming it down next to William's coffee mug. Then he placed the waterproof satchel and the platinum pocket watch beside it. William's annoyance instantly evaporated. He set his revolver down, pulled a jeweler's loop from his drawer, and leaned over the gold ingot. "Where did you pull this up?" William asked, his voice a hushed whisper. 70 miles out. Deep water," Arthur replied. William traced the eagle stamp and the serial number with a pen. "Arthur, this is from the 1983 Boston Federal Reserve transit heist. The papers called it the Providence Bullion Job. The mob took the fall for it, but the money was never recovered. People have been looking for this gold for 40 years. "Look at the watch," Arthur urged. William picked up the platinum timepiece, reading the inscription. He froze, slowly looking up at Arthur. "Richard Covington, the shipping magnate. He died in a plane crash over West Virginia." "He didn't die in a plane crash," Arthur said, pulling the ledger from the satchel. "He was dropped in the Atlantic Ocean with a lockbox full of stolen federal gold. And this book tells exactly who put him there." William opened the ledger, his eyes scanning the neatly handwritten columns. The color drained from his face as he recognized the names. Some of these men were still alive. Some of them were sitting in the halls of Congress. Some of them controlled private military contracting firms worth billions. "This is a shadow ledger," William muttered, flipping the pages. "Covington was laundering the stolen gold to fund black book operations off the books for the government. When he got too powerful, they tied up a loose end." "Arthur, you haven't just found treasure. You've found the smoking gun to a 40-year-old conspiracy involving the highest levels of the Pentagon." "What do I do with it?" Arthur asked, the weight of the situation finally crushing his chest. "You hand it over to a federal judge. Only a federal judge. But we need to authenticate the routing numbers first to prove it's real." William grabbed his desk phone. "I know a guy at the Treasury Department. An old contact. I'm going to wake him up." "William, wait," Arthur started, feeling a sudden spike of dread. But William was already dialing. He spoke in low, hushed tones for about 2 minutes, using coded language, reading off one of the serial numbers on the gold bar. "He's going to run the number through the secured mainframe and call me back," William said, hanging up. "We just sit tight." 15 minutes passed in suffocating silence. The ticking of the antique clocks in the shop sounded like sledgehammers. Then Arthur's cell phone buzzed. It was Tommy. Arthur answered it. "Tommy, is everything okay?" "Arthur!" Tommy screamed, the sound of splintering wood and shouting in the background. "They're on the boat, men in tactical gear. They didn't show badges, Arthur. They just started sashing the—" A loud gunshot echoed through the phone, followed by a wet thud, and then dead silence. "Tommy! Tommy!" Arthur roared into the receiver. Nothing. Arthur looked at William, his blood turning to ice. "Someone hit the boat." Before William could respond, the screech of tires echoed from the alley behind the pawn shop. Heavy, synchronized footsteps hit the pavement. "The Treasury database," William whispered, horrified, backing away from the desk. "The mainframe. It flagged the serial number. It pinged our location." "We have to go, now," Arthur said, grabbing the gold bar and the ledger, shoving them back into the bag. But it was too late. The heavy steel back door of the pawn shop exploded inward with a deafening boom. The heavy steel back door of the pawn shop exploded inward with a deafening boom, tearing the frame from the brick wall. Splintered wood and twisted metal showered the cramped back office as a concussive shockwave knocked Arthur to the floor. Through the swirling dust and smoke, 3 figures clad in unmarked black tactical gear poured into the room. Their suppressed rifles raised and laser sights cutting through the darkness. "Through the floor, now!" William screamed, dropping his antique revolver and lunging toward a heavy rug beneath his desk. Arthur scrambled backward, his heart hammering violently against his ribs. He grabbed the heavy waterproof satchel containing the ledger and the single gold ingot, hauling it over his shoulder. William violently kicked the rug aside, revealing a reinforced steel trapdoor. The paranoid former accountant had spent years retrofitting his shop for the worst-case scenario, and that paranoia was now the only thing keeping them alive. William yanked the trapdoor open and shoved Arthur down into the pitch-black abyss just as the first suppressed shot thwipped past his ear, shattering a glass display case of vintage pocket watches. William tumbled down the concrete stairs right behind him, slamming the heavy steel door shut and throwing a massive deadbolt just as heavy boots trampled overhead. They were in a subterranean storm drain, a forgotten remnant of the city's Prohibition-era smuggling tunnels. The air was thick with the stench of stagnant water and rotting concrete. William switched on a tactical flashlight, the beam illuminating a narrow, dripping passageway. "Move!" William hissed, his breathing shallow and ragged. "That door will buy us exactly 3 minutes before they use thermite to melt the hinges. Keep your head down and don't stop walking." Arthur followed blindly, the weight of the gold bar slamming against his hip with every hurried step. His mind was a violent hurricane of grief and terror. Tommy was gone. The kid had just wanted to pay off a gambling debt, and Arthur had left him alone on the iron wake with a target on his back. The guilt threatened to swallow him whole, but the cold, hard reality of the ledger in his hands forced him to keep moving. They had uncovered something that powerful men had killed to keep buried, and those same men were currently dismantling his life piece by piece. They waded through freezing water for nearly a mile until the tunnel finally sloped upward, ending at a rusted iron grate. William pushed it open, and the 2 men emerged into the freezing torrential rain in a deserted commuter parking lot just outside the city limits. Hidden beneath a decaying tarp in the corner of the lot was William's contingency plan, a heavily modified 1998 Chevrolet Suburban with reinforced suspension and off-the-grid plates. William unlocked the doors and slumped into the driver's seat, his hands shaking violently as he inserted the key. "They pinged the Treasury database," he muttered, his voice barely audible over the roaring storm. "That means the corruption isn't just historical, Arthur. It's active. The people Covington was paying off in 1987 passed their network down. If we take this to a federal judge, we'll be dead before we even reach the courthouse steps." "So what do we do?" Arthur demanded, wiping a thick mixture of rain and mud from his face. "They killed Tommy. They have my boat. They have the rest of the gold. We can't just disappear. We don't go to the law. William said, his eyes narrowing with sudden resolve. "We go to the press. We make it so public that they can't hide behind Black Ops hit squads. We drop a bomb on their entire operation." Arthur thought for a second. Who can we trust? A local paper won't touch a conspiracy involving the Department of Defense. We need someone who has taken on the Pentagon before and won, William said, pulling the Suburban out of the lot and accelerating onto the deserted highway. Rebecca Sterling is out of the question. She retired. But there's a senior investigative reporter at the Washington Chronicle. Her name is Catherine Caldwell. Last year, she exposed a massive embezzlement ring within a private military contracting firm in Virginia. She's fearless, she's completely independent, and she hates government corruption more than anyone I know. "Can you reach her?" Arthur asked, clutching the satchel tightly to his chest. "I have a secured, encrypted email server," William replied, his eyes constantly checking the rearview mirror for any sign of pursuit. "I can send her a digitized scan of one of the ledger pages, just enough to prove we aren't crazy. But we have to move fast. By sunrise, our faces will be plastered across every law enforcement database in the country as armed and dangerous fugitives." For the next 2 hours, they drove through the blinding storm, avoiding major highways and toll booths. They finally pulled into the parking lot of a desolate 24-hour truck stop near the New Hampshire border. The neon sign buzzed erratically in the wind, casting a sickly red glow over the cracked asphalt. Using a burner laptop from the trunk of the Suburban, William painstakingly photographed a single page of Covington's ledger. It was the page detailing a massive offshore transfer authorized by a man named Harrison Wade, a man who was currently sitting on the Senate Armed Services Committee. William encrypted the file and sent it to Catherine Caldwell's secure tip line, adding a brief, urgent message. "Covington's ghost is awake. We have the lockbox. We have the Treasury gold. Meet us at the Boston Public Library reading room at 6 a.m. or the story dies with us." "Now," William whispered, closing the laptop. "We wait." The silence in the vehicle was suffocating. Arthur stared out into the darkness, the faces of his grandfather and father flashing in his mind. The Iron Wake was gone. His crew was dead. The quiet, grueling life of a Gloucester fisherman had been completely obliterated in a matter of hours. All that remained was the heavy burden of the truth, sitting in a rubberized satchel. At 4:15 a.m., the burner phone in William's pocket vibrated. It was a text message from an unknown number. "I want the whole book. South entrance. Don't be late." The city of Boston was slowly waking up as the heavy storm finally broke, leaving behind a cold, grey morning. The streets were slick with rain, reflecting the amber glow of the streetlights. Arthur and William abandoned the Suburban a mile away and walked the rest of the distance to Copley Square, keeping their heads down and their collars pulled high against the biting wind. The Boston Public Library was a fortress of stone and history. At 5:50 a.m., the massive bronze doors were still locked to the general public, but Catherine Caldwell had clearly pulled strings. A side service entrance was propped open with a folded newspaper. Arthur and William slipped inside, navigating the labyrinthine corridors of the basement until they reached the majestic, vaulted reading room on the second floor. The room was vast, lined with towering mahogany bookshelves, and bathed in the pale morning light filtering through the massive arched windows. Sitting at a long oak table in the center of the room was a woman in her late 40s, wearing a tailored trench coat and round wire-rimmed glasses. Catherine Caldwell looked exactly like a woman who systematically destroyed political careers before her morning coffee. Beside her sat a burly photographer, unpacking a high-resolution scanner and a digital camera. "You're the Fisherman," Catherine said, her sharp blue eyes locking onto Arthur as they approached. She didn't waste time on pleasantries. "Show me the ledger." Arthur didn't speak. He unzipped the damp satchel and placed the leather-bound book on the table, followed by the platinum pocket watch and the heavy gold ingot. Catherine's breath hitched as she picked up the watch, reading the inscription. She gently opened the ledger, turning the fragile, water-damaged pages with extreme care. Her eyes darted across the columns of names, dates, and account numbers, her expression transforming from professional skepticism to pure, unadulterated shock. "My God," Catherine whispered, pointing to a specific entry. "This isn't just bribery." Covington was funneling diverted federal funds into unacknowledged foreign coup operations. And these signatures, Senator Wade, Director Calloway, former General Hughes, they ordered the hit on Covington when he threatened to blow the whistle. "They killed my deckhand last night," Arthur said, his voice trembling with a mixture of rage and exhaustion. "They raided my boat. They took the rest of the gold. If you don't publish this now, we're dead men." "We're digitizing it right now," Catherine said, nodding sharply to her photographer, who immediately began scanning the ledger pages at lightning speed. "I have my editor standing by at the Chronicle. We bypass the standard legal review. We push this directly to the digital front page. Once the data is distributed to thousands of servers worldwide, they can't stop the signal." For 20 agonizing minutes, the only sound in the cavernous reading room was the rhythmic flash of the scanner. Arthur paced near the window, peering out into the street below. Suddenly, his blood ran cold. 3 unmarked black SUVs screeched to a halt outside the library's main entrance. Men in tactical gear, identical to the ones who had raided the pawn shop, began pouring out, forming a perimeter. "They found us," Arthur shouted, backing away from the window. "William, they're here." "How did they track us?" William panicked, looking around frantically. "Traffic cameras with facial recognition," Catherine stated calmly, though her hands flew across her laptop keyboard with blistering speed. "The city is wired. Hold them off for 2 minutes. I just need 2 minutes to compile the encrypted data packet and hit upload." Arthur grabbed a heavy brass floor lamp, snapping the stand over his knee to create a makeshift weapon. William pulled a secondary, snub-nosed revolver from his ankle holster, aiming it steadily at the heavy oak doors of the reading room. Footsteps thundered up the marble staircase outside. The tactical team wasn't bothering with stealth anymore. They were a death squad operating on borrowed time. "Upload at 90%!" Catherine yelled over the sound of heavy fists hammering against the locked reading room doors. "Break it down!" a muffled voice commanded from the hallway. The heavy oak doors groaned violently as a battering ram struck them. Wood splintered. The hinges screamed. Arthur gripped his brass pipe, ready to fight to his last breath to avenge Tommy. 95%, Catherine shouted, her finger hovering over the enter key. Crack! The doors buckled under a second massive blow. Done. Catherine slammed the keyboard. The packet is away. It's gone to the Washington Chronicle, the New York Times, and the Associated Press simultaneously. The doors exploded inward, and 6 tactical operatives swarmed the room, their laser sights painting Arthur, William, and Catherine in deadly red dots. "Drop your weapons! Hands on your heads!" the lead operative roared. Arthur dropped the brass pipe. William slowly lowered his revolver, letting it clatter to the floor. The operatives rushed forward, violently shoving them against the oak tables and securing their hands with thick zip ties. The lead operative grabbed the ledger from the table, a triumphant smirk crossing his face as he radioed his superior. "Target secured. We have the package. Preparing to neutralize the hostiles." But before the operative could issue the final order, Catherine's cell phone rang loudly. Then the photographer's phone buzzed. Then every single cell phone in the pockets of the tactical operatives began to chime simultaneously. The lead operative pulled his phone from his vest, glancing at the screen. His triumphant smirk vanished, replaced by a look of absolute, sickening horror. Every major news outlet in the world had just updated their front pages simultaneously. The headline was massive, glaring, and inescapable. The Covington Conspiracy, Sunken Gold, reveals 40-year shadow government corruption. Senator Wade implicated in assassination. The operatives lowered their weapons, exchanging panicked glances. The secret was out. The Black Ops umbrella protecting them had just evaporated in a matter of seconds. Sirens began to wail in the distance. Not the silent arrival of hit squads, but the blaring alarms of Boston police and FBI internal affairs units pushing to secure the library. Arthur slumped against the oak table, letting out a long, ragged breath. He had lost his boat. He had lost his friend. But as the flashing red and blue lights illuminated the vaulted ceiling of the reading room, he knew the ghosts of the Atlantic had finally been put to rest. If this incredible true story of a simple fisherman uncovering a 40-year-old government conspiracy kept you on the edge of your seat, hit that like button and share it with your friends. We bring you the most thrilling, unbelievable real-life mysteries every single week. Don't miss out on our next deep dive into history's greatest secrets. Subscribe to the channel, click the notification bell, and drop a comment below on what you would do with 30 million in sunken gold.